Hello, hello. Good evening. Another night of On Difficulties. It was a long day. It was a long week. In fact, I was out of town. And the reason for being minutes late here on this couch in front of this camera and the green dot of a MacBook. See those books over there, adjacent, not adjacent, across the room on top of the bookshelf. A book on algorithms, Newton's Principia, and some other things I have not and may never thumb through, leafing through. But it is summer. The leaves are green. I was minutes late. My apologies. 65 miles per hour on the interstate from the town where I was working this week. I have arrived at home, and I tell you what, it is a relief. It is a relief to be home. And shall I say even more so or on par with? I don't know, so I won't put my thumb on either scale. It is a comfort to have the church father, St. Maximus, here, and some words to read and thoughts to think through in connection, as they would say in an 18th century treatise, in CONNEXION, in connection with the title for this video, Dull Distances of Fragmentary Pasts. Dull distances of fragmentary pasts. Soren Kierkegaard, as he was composing, I found this in one of his journals. He would, as he was composing a text, say, fear and trembling, or either or some upbuilding discourse in his latter career, which was a short one, by the way. He would say that his practice, his tangible habit, was to pace the floor of his living room. Can you imagine this man in profile with 19th century garb, maybe a cigar, certainly a cup of coffee, not too equidistant from one corner of the room to the other. And there he was with his shoes on from one end of the living room to the other. And what was he doing? Hands behind back. I was about to say running, but that's the wrong verb. Walking briskly through the argument. Walking briskly through the argument until he came back to himself. In that part of the living room where his shoes had made a scuff mark before, 20 seconds before, 2 sentences before, where he placed the comma, and now he looks at the comma down there where the words should be, and he says to himself out loud, up to the corner of the room, no, not the breath mark, no, not there. And then he thinks in his synthetic commentary, peripatetic as well, indeed. Peri around. Patella, I think, is that a part of the foot? Walking around with your feet, leaning back on the sole of your foot, at any rate. Did he say to himself, no, here I will allude to that part of the gospel with the overlay of a Socratic dialogue that I'm fitting in with an observation I made of someone at the store that I saw earlier today when I was walking down the block. And he self-published his works. So he knew in the back or the middle, by the anteroom of his ear, part of his mind, that, oh, so-and-so of such and such last name will read this, and they might see the scuff mark where I had the comma and then I removed it, so now it sounds like a run-on sentence as I'm bringing the gospel in with this Socratic allusion. Will they understand? And moreover, will they understand as I want them to understand me? These questions, I wonder if they are fruitful after all. Do you remember when Christ was on his way to Jerusalem, walking there with his disciples? And he stops by the fig tree, which you can imagine is outside Jerusalem, but close, within earshot of a curse or a blessing. And by this fig, which is a large tree, many leaves, so much that you could dip in, move your arm around looking for figs, finding none. With respect to Kierkegaard's audience, his contemporary audience, since he was speaking and writing and pacing in his living room for his contemporaries, expecting them to find in his prose figs or no figs or the promise of figs, or at the end of the day when the sun sets on the fig tree, is it all irony in the Kierkegaardian landscape? I don't know. Let that serve as a prelude to tonight's reading of St. Maximus the Confessor. Last week, we looked at the first section of his argument directed towards those who would think that way back there, beyond the wall of the historical paces, way back there, way to the primordial, as Martin Heidegger might say. Way before the appearing, there was this unity, this one, this satisfaction. And then, for some reason, inexplicable and yet inevitable, dispersion. Nope, not good enough. Nope. Multiplicity, sparks, goes which way in that, every way. So the Creator imprisoned them in bodies to punish them, to make them pay with time their swerves, their skid marks of individuality on the surface of the real. False. St. Maximus says, in fact, to rehearse in brief what he said last week, those who hold such a view are those who expect no reward for labor undertaken in search of the truth. They are those who carry around a rather facile interpretation and cling to certain doctrines of the Greeks. And they speak of this swerve, this movement, this kind of slide, as if it were in no need of explanation. And the beauty of St. Maximus's mind and heart and activity with the pen on paper is that he took their assumption without explanation and made it the core gap to fill with his argument. To use a fancy word, the lacuna. He did what every philosopher should do. He questioned his opponent's basic assumption. There's a skid mark on the floor of their worldview. They must be wearing shoes. Let's go look for shoes. Let's diversify our portfolio of observations with the categories of different shoes, leather, cowhide. Is that the same thing? That is the same thing. Equivocation. And one could skip and jump with that sort of methodology. But St. Maximus goes levels deeper by asking the question, skid mark, probably a shoe in their worldview. I don't care about the shoe question. I want to know, why was anyone moving at all in their worldview? What is movement at all? So this unites Kierkegaard walking as a writer, writing as a writer, thinking as a thinker, to a bee going from flower to flower, looking for the pollen, maybe knowing it will make honey, maybe not knowing it will make honey. But these things are Venn diagram overlapped, like so many incessant waves on the shore, repeating itself, even though each one is different, to the basic question of why is there movement at all? So now the next pericope, the next section, which has been labeled by our translator, Nicholas Constas, as rest and motion. Now, I don't want to read the whole thing because it doesn't sit well with my conscience. This book was written by someone. It has intellectual property. I don't have the rights to it. I shouldn't read every single word. But let me read a few parts, and that will suffice for tonight's conversation at this 13-minute and 7-second mark. A few propositions St. Maximus will bring in here, and these I will read out loud. He begins, if in the first place we accept that the divine is immovable, since it fills all things, whereas everything that has received its being ex nihilo is in motion, since all things are necessarily carried along towards some cause, then nothing that moves has yet come to rest, because its capacity for appetitive movement has not yet come to repose in what it ultimately desires. For nothing but the appearance of the ultimate object of desire can bring to rest that which is carried along by the power of its own nature. So, two things to hold together in mystery. We accept that the divine is immovable, i.e., no motion. Why? Since it fills all things. I believe we are being asked here to imagine, because what is being put forward is not a door open, but a concept. So let us imagine the sides of this concept. What fills all has no movement. Put in another way from the opposite direction, what is without movement fills all things. Now, one has to be careful because it is not the same to say that the immovable fills all things and to say what fills all things is the immovable. Why? Because analytically, someone might say that which is not see, I've lost my train of thought. Already, I am making contortions. I feel that I am this acrobat moving my spine in directions and in angles it ought not to be. And either it will snap back to reality or it will not snap at all. And then I am as good as silly putty. I think what we should keep in mind here is St. Maximus is not laying down a formula. Y equals f of x, that is the function, which I now can describe on an xy coordinate plane given the real number line or given positive set of integers, moving as it were to infinity on the right, designated by the arrow. All of those parts which can be projected onto a chalkboard are assigned value, different values. But it is hard to say whether or not that is any better than stepping outside your front door and looking at a tree limb and saying, limb, for our intents and purposes here, will go to the right towards infinity, and the finite number of leaves we will say are positive integers, and their placement on this three-dimensional coordinate plane, so we'll add another line, locates them in space. And then we can imagine a fly buzzing around, landing, lifting again, and making this continuous line that we can chart. In this space we have assigned values to. Well, is that any different than talking in your sleep? Now I sound like Descartes in one of his meditations. You're walking in the hallway of a hotel and you hear some muttering on the other side of one door, and it's rather loud. So you put your ear, because you're inquisitive, next to that door, and you hear, to the right, aleph, vertical up, assign theta. And then he starts talking 2, 7, and there's some series he's quoting. But it's all vague. There's no connection between the theta and the number 5, and then he throws out pincushion, all this stuff that, yes, he's saying one after the other. And I suppose you could say they're in the set known as his collection of objects, which he is reciting to the ceiling. But this man is asleep. Does he know what he is doing? Does he know what he is experiencing? Does he have any contact at all with the objects that he is assigning value to? And if he believes he is he deceived? Can he know if he is deceived? Well, in the same way, when someone has their ear up against that door and they're making theories, they're supposing, they're guessing, they're having hypotheses happening between their ears as one ear is pressed against the wood, which is hollow, allowing them to imagine a person sleep talking to the ceiling. All these numbers and objects that are assigned value to things. Can he be sure he is reading the room correctly? Because in this example, he's a step removed. The door is shut. He cannot see. He is hearing all there is for him to hear at this moment. What weight to give these propositions? That always is the question. What is too much and what is too little weight to give these propositions? We accept that the divine is immovable, since it fills all things, whereas everything that has received its being ex nihilo, ex, door, exit sign, out of, nihilo, nihil, nothing. Everything that has received its being out of nothing, so not an egg from a chicken, an egg from nothing, a chicken from nothing, an ear to hear from nothing, is in motion. Everything is in motion. Since all things necessarily are necessarily carried along towards some cause. The skid mark on the floor, the sound moving through the wood of the door into the ear, moving in the spiral of the bones in the ear and making reverberations. All this movement from movement all things are necessarily carried along toward some cause. Toward an indefinite infinity, that is not what he says. Here, he says, carried along towards some cause. Towards some cause, Matthew, don't you mean towards some effect? You take those sticks and sparks come up and then, ooh, fire. Isn't the fire the effect? You were moving sticks together to generate? The effect, known as fire, from the sticks. Yes. No. Not according to St. Maximus in his argument, in the laying out of his argument here. Because remember, the original question is, why is there movement at all? At all. At all. Everything. Why is there movement? And what is movement? Is it the mere displacement of stuff from here to there, and that is work? Is it a UPS job? Is it a USPS job? Is it a flight of fancy? Is that what we mean here? No. Or not only what we mean here. Peculiar, huh? This stumbling block. All things are necessarily carried along towards some effect, towards some cause. I righted the screen because it was lopsided. Well, the effect, and there are some books down there, some books, and that effect of moving it so that it seems flat and equidistant from either side of my ear, that movement towards center, towards centering, is not to the effect of it now appearing to you as centered, if I'm following St. Maximus the Confessor. That movement of centering is toward the cause of meeting a person. Which now you can abstract, see more from. Why do we grow up? Why do we grow at all? Why do we gain and decline in stature? To meet a person. Carried along towards some cause. As an aside here, in the first 1,000 years after or circa AD 0, in the Neoplatonic literature, if you dive into that literature, you will find a certain pressure on your helmet. And if you could feel what your oxygen tank is feeling, you would feel the pressure from all sides of this thought. Every effect seeks to be reunited with its cause. The Neoplatonic philosophers were big on that idea, on that concept. Causes don't sputter like the front lawn, what are they called? Those little things that sputter with water when you want to water your lawn. What is the word? Hose? There's a hose hooked up to this sputtering thing that goes left to right like a typewriter's fingertips with pulses of water, bursts of water. A cause for the Neoplatonic philosophers is not something that bursts effects out there. Special, ooh, effects, ooh, light, ooh, photons, ooh, supernovas, ooh. And they go far from the cause, as if there was a multiplicity that just had to swerve out of the way. I'm 17, I've got my license, I'm out of here. No, that's not the relationship of the effect to the cause in the Neoplatonic household. For the Neoplatonist, Plotinus and all these other people, St. Maximus the Confessor here, in the countenancing of his argument, as it were standing on the threshold of the house at the front door at curfew, his toes are tapping, and he's saying underneath his breath, the effects are supposed to return to their causes. Where is it? Sprinkler. Thank you, Anselman. After the Renaissance, after the Enlightenment, after the David Hume in his infamous example of the balls on the table of the pool table, where that horrible analogy, that misleading analogy of cause and effect are the white ball to any other ball on the table being knocked. That the moment the white ball hits a ball, the white ball stops and the other ball goes somewhere. According to the angle it was hit from, it then follows a line until it hits the side of the wall, and then it goes according to an angle of incidence, and then hits another ball and then stops so that other ball can receive the momentum of the original ball, which was dropped a little so that this ball could have some, and now the third ball has a little less until they all stop. And that was the procession, if you will, of effects being diminutive and smaller than the cause. Who doesn't like a game of pool? But that is not the whole cosmos. That is not the conceptual field for metaphysics. I'm sorry, David Hume. A game of pool does not capture life itself. Nor does it capture the story of the effect's return to the cause. Because if we must walk alongside or stand at one end of the table while Hume is knocking his ball with the pool cue, then we would see the white ball going to, let's say, the 8 ball. And as the 8 ball moves, the white ball continues and it follows and it encourages the 8 ball and then welcomes it back. It invites it back. Matthew, this makes little sense. It makes little sense to me too. To me, it shows how hard it is to imagine a world outside of David Hume's assumptions, of empirical billiard balls giving some energy to the other static empirical billiard balls that gently move a little after the fact. And it's tempting to take that as a cosmological constant because we get older. After a hard day's work, we're tired, we feel depleted. But you know what? If we pray, we can find the cause that undepletes our depletion so that we are replete again. And even more than physical space, the filling, the repleteness is a quality, not just a quantitative adding up. There is a sense of approaching completeness. Maybe that is one reason why St. Maximus brings in this proposition. The divine is immovable since it fills all things, whereas everything that has received its being ex nihilo is in motion, since all things are necessarily carried along towards some cause. He goes on, then nothing that moves has yet come to rest. Another reason why we must leave the billiard balls on the pool table of David Hume's hypothesis behind. Nothing that moves has yet come to rest. Well, when I look at the pool table, all the balls have went in the holes and they've stopped. in that little long line where they all are aligned, arranged side by side. Not according to how St. Maximus is using the word motion. Nothing that moves has yet come to rest because its capacity for, here's his reason, and also a hint at what he means by motion, the Greek kinesis, because its capacity for appetitive movement. Ooh, what's that? I do not know. Appetite, well, that's part of the word. Appetite movement, movement of the appetite, desire, a hankering for. Its capacity for appetitive movement has not yet come to repose in what it ultimately desires. So I would like a nice walk outside in the park with the sunlight flitting through the leaves. Maybe a dog running beside me catching a frisbee. That would be a sight to see. And maybe underneath one arm, I want a long blanket that I could roll out on the grass and then lay down on it. And maybe in my other arm, I have a picnic basket full of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Oh, what a thought. What an afternoon. What a quantity of time I could put side by side in static bliss of having everything in the right place. Well, that story is an example of the appetite ranging itself, moving, longing in its movement for something not here but there, and there is the longing for, and yet what I am longing for, I do not know. And so my imagination populates the distance with picnic basket, blanket, sun flitting through the leaves, dog jumping and moving its head to catch the frisbee in midair. These are objects that populate the distance between where I am and what I ultimately desire. But I know what I ultimately desire does not terminate in the object known as dog catching frisbee or the peanut butter on top of jelly in a sandwich. These are, I can't even call them approximations. They're what I use to sort of evoke what I am talking about, even though I know what I am talking about has next to nothing to do with those things. So, what am I talking about? Am I talking about nothing? Am I talking about a collective wish that's surging through me, known as society, known as propaganda? I believe not. I believe that what I am talking about, even though I do not know what I am talking about, but using these images to evoke a sensation and feeling in the direction of, is what I ultimately desire. And I believe that we can be tutored along the way in our conduct to want the virtuous things that will remind us and excite us toward the ultimate desire. Some places run up ahead, some places walk up ahead. Some religions swerve to the right, some religions swerve to the left. If it's true, it's orthodox. And while we are here, we have this capacity for appetitive movement. And one sure clue that we are not satiated, that we were made for more, as C.S. Lewis would say, is we are aware this very moment that this movement, this appetite, has not yet come to repose. To be in a position where we'll not have any other positions anymore in the future. If that makes you think, ooh, no more positions in the future, ooh, then congratulations. You still have a capacity for appetitive movement, which means the ultimate object of desire is not behind you, it's ahead of you. This is good news. This is good news. And then he concludes in this long sentence, for nothing but the appearance. The Greek word here is phenomenon. For nothing but the phenomenon of the ultimate object of desire can bring to rest that which is carried along by the power of its own nature. Not what someone told you to want, not what you think you should want, but what you actually want deeply according to what you are. That's the nature. It's not a pool ball receiving motion from another pool ball and saying, you go over there because I said so. That's not the motion, the power here described. We can't even see it because it's subterranean. In screenwriting, they would say, find your character's desire and then the scenes will write themselves. Because when you have a desire, you will find a way through any conflict. And so any scene could be written, as long as you have the golden thread taut of the desire, and that desire being constant. Doesn't matter what values you assign to the furniture, to the sky, to the location of your story, if your desire is secure in the ultimate, which is not in the scene, and it's not even at the end of the story in a finite understanding. Man, St. Maximus is so subtle. He is saying, and now I will quote him a few paragraphs down, as they maintain, those people he is arguing against, what happened was the inevitable result of certain conditions, so that rational beings were moved from their abode and remaining in what alone is ultimately desirable, and consequently were broken up and scattered into multiplicity. We must ask in no uncertain terms, what proof do they have? They have none. For if what they say is true, it necessarily follows that rational beings, when found in the same circumstances, will undergo the same changes ad infinitum. For anyone who through experience is able even once to spurn something will find no reason to cease from doing so for all eternity. And here is the kicker, the clincher. And if rational beings are to be swept away, and if rational beings are to be swept about in this way, and are to be without any hope for an immovable foundation of stability in the beautiful, what more pitiful condition of existence could there possibly be? That's the heart, the core, the target of what St. Maximus cares about in developing this argument against those people who would say, way back there in the primordial, there was a unity, and then for some reason, inexplicable and yet inevitable, multiplicity, dispersion. Oh, they went their own way. What St. Maximus is saying to the contrary is, what I care about is the condition of existence, because that is what we all have to deal with. Is the condition of existence good? Not good? If one or the other, why? What is the history? And is it a reliable history? Or is it someone just putting their ear against a hotel door and surmising what's going on through the annals of passageways, through gossip, through newspapers, through libraries, through authorities? through one's own imaginings and reckonings. No one's off the hook. Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, we all must give an account for our state of existence. If to no one else, then to polished glass, I mean the mirror. Our state of existence will announce itself before it is too late. And that's what he cares about. Now, he is saying, if all we have to look forward to is constant movement and being swept aside from this to that, to the other thing, to the other thing, to the other thing, and down there, ooh, look, shiny. He's saying, I cannot imagine a more pitiful condition of existence. God help us. Instead, what he is going for is this immovable foundation of stability. Where? In this vacuous abstraction? No. He finishes it. An immovable foundation of stability in the beautiful. And he capitalized the B. The beautiful. This is a Neoplatonic move, or if you will, this is the way they thought before David Hume played a game of pool, before the Renaissance and its optical illusions in their paintings, before the scientific revolution. The people thought metaphysically about movement. The beautiful, it's not a judgment call, or at least it wasn't the way they thought about it back then. Back then, they thought about the beautiful as a condition of existence one could be in or not be in. And God help us if we are not in that state of existence someday, and maybe now. The stakes could not be higher. Well, how do we attain to this immovable foundation of stability in the beautiful? St. Maximus the Confessor. In this section, he does not answer the question, because remember, he is developing his argument. But there is a hint here at the very end, which I will read for you now, of this pericope. He speaks of the most precious of all possessions. What do you think St. Maximus says is the most precious of all possessions? He says, and I quote now, I mean love, through which all things created by God are naturally, key word, naturally gathered up in God permanently and without change or deviation. I will say that again. The most precious of all possessions, I mean love, through which all things created by God are naturally gathered up in God, permanently and without change or deviation. It's the exact opposite of what those people he is arguing against claimed. They claimed in the beginning, in the beginning, they were all gathered up into unity. And then for some reason, scatterbrained. St. Maximus is saying no, quite to the contrary. Now, scatterbrained, multiplicity. In the future, through love, all things created by God are naturally gathered up in God permanently and without change or deviation. It can be hard to believe that, but we are asked to believe it through St. Maximus the Confessor's developing argument. So let us take our time, since we have time, and sit with that thought. I've been sitting with these paragraphs all week. In the morning, I would go to a coffee shop in the town where I was working, I would have a granola bar and a cup of coffee, and I would say my, I don't want to say everything. I would say my prayers, and then I would read those passages, and I would see new things in it because it's such a technical argument on the one hand, but poetically subtle with resonances on the other hand. And I failed you. I failed you in evoking what I felt. But maybe through my inadequate words, you will see some bricks that you could take and stack and be inspired to build inner fortifications against the semblances out there. That the moment you touch them, they are consumed. Let us not be consumed as we search for the truth, indeed, as we seek the kingdom of God. Above all things and before all things, dare I say, we make it our priority. And the last little spark note from tonight's discussion, remember and perhaps try to think about how, experiment how the effect is supposed to come back to its cause. How could that be? And what does that mean in relation to definitions of movement? And does that answer the question, why is there movement at all? Does it beg the question, or does it open the concept of the question for further exploration? And with that, we can leave Kierkegaard pacing back and forth. Good night. That gathering up. Oh, that's good, Anselman. Well, we met each other then in our thinking. Beautiful. Good night, Anselman. Thank you for attending and listening with me and sharing the time. You're up. It's late where you are. I know it is. As you said, you stay up late. Good night.